This interview is sponsored by the James J. Blanchard Living Library on behalf of the Michigan Political History Society. Our guest is Bob LaBrant, former vice president and legal counsel for the Michigan Chamber of Commerce, now retired, he says. Bob LaBrant, welcome.
Semi-retired.
Semi-retired, okay. Let's start out. Weren't you originally a Hoosier and a Badger before you became a Michigander?
I was born in Baraboo, Wisconsin, the home of the Ringling Brothers Circus. But my parents were living in Gary, Indiana at the time, but my mother had had a difficult pregnancy with my older brother and decided to come back to Baraboo and have the same doctor and have the delivery in the same hospital. But I grew up in northwest Indiana. We lived in Gary till I was 5, and then we moved to Hammond, Indiana, where I went to high school. I started in kindergarten in Hammond, and then I went all the way through high school, and then I went up to Wisconsin to go to college. I graduated from what is now the University of Wisconsin at Stevens Point. And from there, then went on into the Army, returned from Vietnam, and got a job. My first civilian job was with the Appleton Area Chamber of Commerce. Then I worked for a Wisconsin congressman in D.C. and then back in the district. And then went down to Milwaukee to be the Milwaukee Chamber's state legislative lobbyist. Then I worked for a political action committee that was headquartered in Washington, D.C., but I was its Midwest regional manager with an office in Milwaukee. And it was there that I became acquainted with Michigan and Jim Barrett and accepted a position with the Michigan Chamber of Commerce back in July of 1977, and I've lived here ever since.
Okay, so you come to Michigan, it's 1977. What did you find, not only in Michigan, the political scene, but maybe more importantly, the Michigan Chamber of Commerce, how they operated, what kind of an organization they had been up until that time, and what maybe needed to be done to turn things around in your view?
Well, when I was considering whether to come to Michigan, I did take a look at the political landscape of Michigan, and although there was a Republican governor, almost all the other officials, statewide officials, were Democrats. The state legislature was dominated by the Democrats. After all, Michigan was the home of the UAW, and organized labor was extremely important in Michigan politics. What I considered in coming to Michigan was, we had a brand new campaign finance law that went into effect just the month before I came. And I knew that that would give the business community some opportunities to begin to organize political action committees. And I had some experience doing that in Wisconsin, and I thought I could emulate that and replicate that in Michigan.
And so what did you encounter in your first election cycle in Michigan, which I think would have been 1978?
Well, 1978, almost everything that could possibly be on the ballot except for the presidency was on the ballot. We had Bill Milliken was running against Bill Fitzgerald for governor. You had the other statewide constitutional offices up for election. All the congressional seats.
U.S. Senate.
The U.S. Senate, Bob Griffin was off again, on again in that race, and then was challenged by Carl Levin. And then we had both the House and the Senate up for election. And then something that was unique, I found unique because I didn't have any experience with statewide ballot question proposals in Wisconsin. In Michigan, we had in that election 11 ballot questions. That's the largest number of ballot questions in Michigan history then and since. one of the questions was this automatic question that has been part of the Michigan political scene since 1850. And every 16 years, the voters of the state of Michigan are asked the question, shall we convene a call for a new constitutional convention? And so in 1978, that was the first time that that question was automatically on the ballot, following the implementation of the 1963 Michigan Constitution. So I got involved in that particular ballot question and served as the treasurer of the committee. And also that year, I was also the treasurer of the Headley Tax Limitation Amendment Committee. And those, that was an experience that probably stood me well in getting to know a number of people around the state while those two campaigns were going on.
Yeah, Headley was actually one of only a number of tax proposals.
Bob
and it was
Tisch.
the only one that passed.
Yeah.
Headley was the only one that passed.
Bob Tisch, who was the Shiawassee County Drain Commissioner, and I had somehow managed to plunk myself down in my family in Perry, Michigan, so he was actually our drain commissioner. I don't know if I ever had any conversation with the guy up to that point in time, but he put together a kind of a ragtag band of people, and they got the necessary signatures to get the Tisch Amendment on the ballot. Actually, that was the best thing that ever happened to the Headley Amendment, because that issue had been on the ballot in 1976 and was defeated. Bill Milliken had opposed it back in 1976, but in the intervening time, you had Prop 13 out in California, and
property tax cuts.
And so in 1978, the leadership of this tax limitation amendment was taken over by Dick Headley, who at the time was the president of the Alexander Hamilton Life Insurance Company. And in his background, he had actually been the national president of the Jaycees, and had been active with the Romney presidential campaign and things like that. So he gave it a lot of credibility. And Bill Milliken actually endorsed the proposal because the Tisch proposal was so much more radical, and actually the Headley Amendment looked like it was the moderate proposal, and somehow squeaked out, I think, 52% of the vote.
What did you learn overall from the '78 campaign? I mean, going forward. And secondly, what about the chamber as an organization, as it had existed up until that time? Did it start to change under perhaps your guidance and your advice?
Well, let's talk first about '78. I came away with a couple of lessons out of the '78 election. The first was that although Bill Milliken won in a near landslide over Bill Fitzgerald, Republicans did quite poorly as far as the state legislature was concerned. In 1978, I think the Democrats won 70 seats in the State House of Representatives to just 40 for the Republicans. And in the state Senate, which had already been 24 Democrats, 14 Republicans, that margin remained the same. And so the takeaway from the 1978 election was that we needed to find a way to get involved in the redistricting process, because the Hatcher-Kleiner plan from 1972 was just killing Republicans. That was a very artfully drawn map that guaranteed Democratic control of the House and the Senate for that entire decade. And so that's the principal takeaway that I came away from '78 with.